Right, let's jump over them. We'll talk about 100 Thieves, as I said we would. Right, I want to start here. Right, since 100 Thieves, unlike the two teams we just talked about, made no roster moves. They kept the exact 5 players who are technically the reigning champions of the LCS. The only change the org made, basically, was like they low-key added Mithy as another assistant coach, and he left Cloud9. That was it, basically. Right, the place I want to start is this. Because unlike the other teams, there are a lot of known quantities here from 100 Thieves because of the sample size we've all got to see them play. We've even seen them play internationally, and in fact, spoiler, they ended up playing against the world champions and another semi-finalist team because their group ended up just being way better than you would have thought at Worlds. The question I have is this, Jaska, right? The main criticism against 100 Thieves, even when they were at their peak at the end of last year and even going to Worlds, was a lot of people said they were the team with macro where it's not even like it was bad, they just clearly didn't know what to do beyond a certain point in the game. It's like, unless they'd sort of won the game already or had an outstanding lead, they just looked lost at times. Like, what do you think of 100 Thieves now? Like, do they still have these issues, do you think?
Well, I mean, if you think about going into the expectations of like when we saw 100 Thieves in the playoffs of the summer split, they weren't expected to win. So
No.
Even if they're like going at their level that they're at right now, this is actually the expected level if we discount their peak in the summer split. Like they're not super like it doesn't. It's not a question about why they're at the level that they're at. They weren't expected to be continuously first in the LCS. I think that they play really well around closer, and that was the big issue that made them not as good before. But they're doing good plays around him now and really helping facilitate him. And he's in their wins, they're still playing very well around that. I'm not sure if they still have those issues of not being able to close out games. I would have to just see more games, more sets between them. I'm not sure if that's still an issue for them.
Okay. Where are you at, Kira?
That's it. When I look at this team, I basically was like, Reaper looked at the double lift teams that like beat him all the time, and he was like, okay, it's now my turn to have like the double lift team. This team is like just the double lift team, but they've got an aggressive jungler instead of Xmithy. Like Someday is literally just taking the role of impact. He will sack everything for the team. He will sometimes play carries if it's the right matchup, but the majority of the time he will play off meta tanks. He will literally be placed on an island and be expected to use his experience and his maturity to like withhold ganks and control his lane. And they will always play front to back team fights, rely on like engage centric supports, and their backline and mid and ADC will carry and try and outmuscle every single team fight. And if you like look at their damage percentage from the backline on Abagadagi and FBI, it's like some of the highest percentages in the league. They're like 30% almost each. Like these two people like get a lot of protection from their team, they get a lot of space made for their team, and they output a lot of damage. And right now it's like working and the system's good. They have like the best real team fighting fundamentals in the league. That's a dangerous thing in NA where like teams are extremely sloppy. Sometimes of all the teams I've seen, their laning is the bit that's a bit dodgy. Abadagi's laning can be a bit weird. I'm not too sure about his champion pool. The bot lane, I don't think they're quite as synced up as they were before. They were actually one of the really like elite like 2v2 bot lanes in terms of NA. So it'll be good to see the space go. I'm actually quite high on them, possibly outright winning the split. I would like to see how consistent they can keep this playstyle going, because like that it's like a hammer blow that you see is coming, but can you resist it? It's the same thing every time, but do you have the fundamentals? Do you know how to beat it? That's a question, and majority of the teams to me look like they don't.
Yeah, one of the problems I have with this team overall, 100 Thieves, is, look, I'll set it up in the way that the terms that Jaska used. Like, for the LCS, first of all, if you look at where their roster actually was before they, out of nowhere, won LCS, they're totally fine. Like, they're still an elite team, they're still a good team, they're still in the mix, they've got good players, there's nothing really to complain about with the roster overall, the coaching staff seems good. Like, in general, there are loads of markers that are, like, among the best, pointing upwards. The problem I have is, like, I also don't know with this team how much further it can go. Like, I see a lot of the things they've already done. Like, yeah, they've got strengths, they've got good players. It's like, but there's also not a lot of uncharted territory for the team. Remember, they didn't even change coaching staff really beyond adding an assistant coach. So to me, I don't really know if they can be like the best. And I personally think this is the team, just like at Worlds. There's no universe this team can do anything internationally, boys. Like, you just need such a crazy group to draw at a Worlds. I can't even really envision how it's possible, especially not in the days where we're going to have for LPL teams, for LC. Like, as long as we're going to have that shit, it's over, boys. There's no, like, super easy group that you're going to get at this point in time. It's not just so unlikely it'll happen. So the problem they have internationally is this. The two best players on paper for me are actually probably Closer and FBI, I think, relative to their roles. Abadage is what he is. He's just a good, above-average EU mid laner, but that's it. He's not going to be the guy internationally who does some, like, Jensen shit for my money. So my problem with them is this. FBI is a good player. I actually noticed him even before they won the championship last year. He was probably the best ADC. Like, he was doing a really good job. He also was one of the only fucking ADCs that could actually play at Aphelios and LCS and look competent doing it. So I thought that was a positive. Problem is, though, like, best case scenario, he's like a poor man's double lift. He's not going to be an actually true world class ADC for my money. I think you're just reaching a little bit for that one. And then for me, I just don't see there's any world where realistically, like, Abadage can hold up against the best mids in the entire world. And right now, mid is, again, a super stacked position if we go to Worlds tomorrow. So my issue is this, and this is the one problem I have with their team, is if I was the coach of 100 Thieves, I would very heavily and very cynically play around Closer. I would make my whole game around Closer and essentially giving FBI the drafts to carry team fights. So that's why when I look at the current meta that they have right now, I don't want to see Closer playing back-to-back Trundle games. Trundle! If you think of Closer, you think of Trundle. No, like, that's a game I'm playing just because it's in the meta and people are like, Trundle's fucking sick, you gotta play it. It's like, mate, I've got Closer, like that, Diana, fucking Xin Zhao. Like, you can imagine that you can already in your brain think of the champions you want to see. Lee Sin, by the way, he can play Lee Sin right now. He can play that Lee Sin even when it's not in meta, for fuck's sake. Like, that's what I would aggressively do. I get, like, look, Reaper is someone, if you know, he is also kind of like the Proto LS. He will go to his vision, he will go to his drafting style, he will go to what he thinks works in the meta, and he will, by the way, also just essentially try to draft squeeze you to win 1B or 1. Sometimes he does that. It's the reason why his teams are fantastic in the regular split, you'll notice. He has some of the best regular split performances of any coach ever. His teams are always in the playoffs, they're always in the semis or beyond. The problem I have is, like, I don't know actually if they in this team even play to their strengths always that much, mate. Like, sometimes I feel like they could do so much more. I don't hate on the team though. I think, again, if you know the context of the team, they're perfectly fine. I've nothing against them. I just don't. Essentially, the problem I have with 100 Thieves is there's no oomph for me. There is occasionally, like if there's a game where they put Closer on a nice champion, if they can make it to the mid game and it's just an easy enough game to play out, they're a canny enough team, but there's no, like, special sauce to 100 Thieves for me. They're a little bit meh.
It's really sad because, like, one of the, like, mechanically, like, expressive, like, junglers and crazy carry junglers right now is Gwen. But 100 Thieves, I think, have to ban it, like, really often because, like, the whole idea is that you flex it. You can put it on your top laner and you can put it on your, like, jungler.
But they can't put it on their top, I'm assuming, right?
I'm not sure, like, how competent Sunday would be, like, on Gwen, or how ideal that as, like, an ideal would be. Like, if they started presenting that, like, you know, that's good and stuff, but I'm not sure how, like, consistent it'd be. And so I think you're right now, and because there's, like, the way 100 Thieves, like, play around Abadage on, like, certain, like, picks, and have playing bad matchups, and they've lain him to be fixed by Closer. You know, you kind of, like, they're gimmicking, like, Closer's game, which is, it can be, like, a dangerous thing to get, like, into, because, like, basically relies on a player who's not as good as Closer being better than Closer, like, with the resources that you're giving them. Will Abadage be that against, like, some of the top LPL teams, some of the top LCK teams, LEC teams? I'm not sure. I'm not sure how consistent that will be.
I would say one thing about someday learning new things, like potentially learning a Gwen. You see them picking, like, a lot of Renekton, a lot of Gnar, a lot of things that have been in the meta forever. Someday both played as and against Tryndamere. And I feel like he played both sides of the matchup just horrendously. Like the game that he played against Kumo's Gnar, Kumo's Tryndamere, where he was Gnar, he just completely butchered the laning phase and, like, just should have had such an easier time. And they probably would have won that if someday had a more stable laning phase because of how far behind he got. And when he played Tryndamere, even though he was 7-0-13 or some ridiculous score, like built incorrectly, he didn't use his ults correctly, he team fought poorly. It just happened to be that the circumstances of the game allowed him to make all of these blunders and still have a really good KDA, still look like he was carrying. So Tryndamere is something that's more or less new in the meta. And so far, I don't think they've picked it up well or played against it well. And Gwen might be a similar thing.
By the way, have you actually played with Clauser much in solo queue?
Yeah, I've played a couple games with him. He's a really good jungler.
Just wondered if you had any thoughts on him.
Yeah, no, he just wins. Like, he destroys enemy junglers. Like,
because to me, he's the player where, there was it was a rumor basically behind the scenes that just like they did with Oceanic region, maybe what Riot would do to help NA is just say every minor region doesn't count as an import essentially, or it counts as half an import, some shit like that. The player I remember when I heard that thinking the joke is for this team now with FBI it'd be mega, but the first player I remember thinking about is that will make Closer so valuable, it's nuts. Because if he actually was counted essentially as just an NA player, not an import, mate, this guy is essentially what I always wanted Dardoch to be. Just like a fucking sick mechanical ganking jungler. I've always wanted that in NA because if people haven't noticed, sadly in NA, maybe it's because they have this, this weird culture and how they play the games a bit weird. You tend to end up actually with, it's more people in the vein of the Xmithies and the fucking, let me think, Santorin, Meteor. You notice none of these are super aggro ganking junglers, especially not in the period when you're thinking about them at their best. NA just hasn't really flexed into that kind of champion. I mean, as Kira even said, Svenskeren came over as a super mechanical duelist jungler, and he ended up just as a fucking dog about 4 years later. NA in general hasn't ever had that, wow factor from the jungle. But if you actually have him on the right champion, he can be it. This guy's fucking stud. I think he's really good.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, the only game Sunday played Gwen in, just to go back to that point, was against CLG, and I don't count that, by the way, because they also had, they got Twisted Fate, the Gwen, they got the Miracle Draft, because whoever's coaching over at CLG closed their eyes during pick and ban, but I'm not really that convinced. I'm now thinking to somebody, he's played 3 carry games, Tryndamere, Gwen, and he played a Jace game. Some of these Jace used to be somewhat legit. Those days are that's 5 years ago, guys. Why are we doing this? Why are we pretending players are people they aren't? Come on, be yourself. The only way I can see this team kind of showing a new face and stuff is if they themselves have Abadagi start to pick up some of these stranger pocket picks. For an example, Abadagi won't be contesting Zillion, but Abadagi has shown that he would be able to play a Azir while he contests Vigar. How broad can Abadagi's champion pool get, and how many things can you add to just even give you one trump card against someone? Because in those BO1s at international tournaments, they're the type of things you need if you're going to fall behind in other things. You need to try and catch people out with a 1-up. So I think, if I'm 100 Thieves and I'm going to stick to this style, I need to throw something spicy into the mix to try and catch it out. I've had a full year or 2 years of building up certain fundamentals. This is the time. It's spring. It's early. We should this is where I would like to see Reaper trying to bring in some spicier things and newer things to the stage games, because you can play your old way. Let's see if we can get something new in the house.
I do think, by the way, anyone who's fielding an import/EU mid laner, obviously you can have one if it's the resident now, but I'm talking about a really skilled mid laner essentially. The idea that more teams in LCS aren't trying Veigar mid is unbelievable to me, dude. Because one, we've already alluded to the fact people don't even fucking lane properly, so you can get through lane just like Bjergsen did on Zillion for years. You can get through lane on stuff that maybe shouldn't even in certain matchups. But more importantly, dude, NA is the region that forever has been obsessed with dragon fights. That champion can be so broken if you have it on your team when you're setting up for those dragon fights. He can literally just inhibit you moving across a certain area. You can't get through a certain choke point. Why this has only been played? I looked it up. It's only been played 5 times in LCS so far. That actually blows my mind, dude. I feel that's an area I would be, in the current meta, I would be trying to flex that way more. I'd be trying to use that anytime I could. At least threaten it, for fuck's sake.
Yeah, On you go, Yusuke.
I was going to say that would be a perfect pick for them because it also just sets up the jungler so well, and it's such a strong backline threat in the later stages of the game. And also, it's pretty much just one of the strongest champions in the game right now, if not the strongest. Like, I'm really surprised at how it's not having a lot of priority right now. People probably just don't have a lot of time in it. But like, if you're picking up picks like 3 months after they're OP, after they've already gotten nerfed, like, what's the point?
I mean, the joke is if my boys Jensen and Frogger were playing in the league, it'd already been picked about 10 times, wouldn't it? Like, they alone would have been, Frogger would be maining it at this point in time, mate.
It's kind of,
come on, Kira.
If you look at like what's like defining about like NA right now, like teams obviously around the world are all like caught up in like the Jinx Aphelios craze, like trading those picks, right? Jinx is like a champion whose her survivability is entirely tied to her mobility. Kill one target, you run around like a psychopath. Viger like basically stops that. If you ever get a cage round a Jinx player, our game's over. Like, you know, you've got the ultimate. It's also a really interesting thing. I was talking to some friends and we were thinking about ways to like beat C9 when they had the LS edition. And one of the things we came up with is if you want to beat a team that's going to play as slow as TL and C9, you should just think bigger. Like, just be bigger. Like, do a bigger thing late game. So, like, Viger scales, like, infinitely. He just keeps on scaling. AP numbers just get bigger and bigger. And eventually that R, one-shots, like, someone. You, like, literally flash forward R, and the person just blows up and dies. And if they want to play extremely slow and they want to play around set objectives, we were, like, thinking of, like things like, maybe not so much, but like return of like Ziggs, depends on the numbers, but like Xerath, there was like lots of like picks that we felt like were way more open and malleable to like the NA like way, and Vigar was definitely one of them because just with its infinite scaling, it's like, I don't know, you'll be able to say this, Yusuke, it's actually, is it not quite effective against Trind because you're able to like gatekeep him within like the gates, like when you place a gate, like Trind can't like spin through it and stuff, even though
he also does typically take 50% tenacity.
Oh, right, fair enough. So you just laugh at the gate. Fair enough.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. Fair enough.
Want to see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, you know, be a pleb and don't.